I've never been here's my 5-year plan, here's my 10-year plan sort of guy. It doesn't work for me. I find it sort of narrows my thinking a bit. It's not to criticize that approach. I think it works for a lot of people and that's awesome. It just doesn't work for me. So what I've rationalized it back to is, as long as I'm doing something today that I think will help me get the next thing I want to do, I'm okay with that. So every move I've made internally is like I've actually broadened my experience as a sports administrator and broadened my skill set as a sports administrator, because I'm like, well, now I can do more things in sport as an administrator based on that career journey I've had. I sort of only learned that as I went through. It wasn't what I set out to do, but on reflection, that's what I've done. And it's probably something I'll continue to do for the rest of my professional career.
G'day guys, coming up on the show today is Abhi Arunachalam. Abhi is the head of media rights at Cricket Australia and has been with CA for over 9 years. Abhi started his career as a corporate lawyer. Then after 6 years in private practice, he made the jump to sport, landing a secondment role at the AFL as an in-house lawyer. This gave him a foot into sport and launched his career at Cricket Australia. In Abhi's 9 years at CA, he's made a few internal moves, proving you don't have to sit still in the job you've got. When he started at CA, he joined as a legal counsel. Then he moved to the Big Bash Leagues team as strategy and planning director. And now he's transitioned into media rights. There's lots to look forward to, including how to transition across industries and across departments, plus the ins and outs of working in media rights. Let's go.
I started volunteering.
It's all about who you know in sport.
Am I going to be calling the last 10 seconds of the grand final?
You can connect with the interviewer. The hand goes up when they've got to make a decision.
Having a network is one of the most important things you can do.
I didn't necessarily follow my passion. I followed my curiosity.
Once you've worked in sport, there's no going back.
And then lo and behold, before I left, I got offered too.
Hello and welcome to the SportsGrad podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry. I'm Ryan Walker. Joining me is the media mogul, Ruben Williams, and we are two mates who met at Cricket Australia back in the day. And each week we learn how people made it in sports. We tease out their career decisions, their work habits, skills, and everything they do that makes them great, also that you can learn how to get in, get promoted, and get thriving in the sports industry. Rubes, hello there.
G'day, Ryan. How you doing, mate? I'm doing well, thank you. It's been a big week. There's a lot happening at HQ. We ran our first ever community information night during the week, which is something that we've never done before at SportsGrad. Gave people a little peek under the hood at what the community looks like, and so it was great to meet a lot of members who are going to join us coming up. And then the other big thing that happened was meetups were announced too. They're back for the middle of May, and we're very lucky that Abhi has given us a Friday night of his on the 10th of May in Melbourne to be one of our panel guests. So this is an awesome opportunity to get to know him before he jumps on. And then when the time this recording goes out, I'll be in India. This invitation to go to a couple of weddings in the IPL has finally rolled around. So for those on socials, you'll see a lot of content coming out. Unfortunately, we couldn't go together. The timing just didn't work out for you, Ryan, unfortunately. But I'll be flying out the flag. And for those who've been following the podcast for a while, you will be familiar with Will Taylor and Jack Lloyd, who both work at Cricket Australia, who will be accompanying me. So there's a lot to look out for, Ryan. It's all happening at the moment.
There is a lot happening, I think, in those three things you've mentioned there. Obviously, intake coming up, communities flying, these meetups are coming up, India trips. There is lots happening in HQ. So we're buzzing at the moment, I think is a good way to describe it. And above all, the community is absolutely flying as well. And there's some good wins and obviously some upcoming events for us to share. So give us the rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. So wins this week. This one was huge. And this one was actually incredible timing because on Monday night, we did our live session introducing people to the community, showing them what's on the inside. And one of the things that we show them is the wins channel. And literally 15 minutes before we jump online to show new potential members the wins of the SportsGrad community, Kat Bartholomew pops up with a new full-time job at the AFL. So if that wasn't enough of an example, then I don't know what. Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Kat. You'll never know the impact that you made on the success of that night to us. But we hope you are enjoying a new job as a membership club support coordinator. MinFam, long-time member, lifetime member actually, jumped on that unique offering back in the day. He's got a new role as a membership and ticketing specialist with the South Australian Motorsport Board. So well done to you, Min. And Sam Rosebacken has got a new job as a sports coordinator at RecLink Australia. And then longtime member and Perth favourite of ours, Yuri Bilcic, has got a job as a waffle match reporter with 7 West Media. And I believe had a few of his pieces published in the West Australian the other day, which is huge. So you can literally go to your newsagent, open up the paper and see the work of a SportsGrad member in there, which is amazing. So well done to you, Yuri. As always, plenty of events going on, Ryan. When you're listening to this, SportsGrad rookie members will have their speed networking tonight at 7 p.m. And pro members' speed networking is happening tomorrow on a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Meetups are just announced. Melbourne, we're coming to you on the 10th of May in collaboration with Carlton Footy Club. We're going to be out at Icon Park. The VFL is going to be on at the background. It's a new location for us up in Carlton, but it's going to be a terrific night. They have a sensational space, and we have some sensational speakers come along to that as well. Brisbane will be in town on the 15th of May and Sydney on the 16th of May. And in and around that, our next intake of rookie members is opening up on the 14th of May. So if you want to join and want to get a ticket to a meetup and want to get involved in absolutely everything that's going on, that will be a chance to do so. Otherwise, stay in touch with everything we're doing. The newsletter is where you can get all the information, all the events, all the podcasts, everything that's going on. So head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe. There's also a link in the show notes to join.
Amazing, mate. What a month May is. It's shaping up to be one of the biggest of all time, I reckon. So it is all happening. In the meantime, we absolutely love this chat. So grab a pen, enjoy this episode with Abhi Arunachalam. Are you aiming for a future in sport? Be ready to transform the industry. Study with Deakin and be prepared to redefine what it means to work in sport. Deakin's School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences is ranked #1 in the world. So if you want to turn your passion for sport into an impactful career, get ready to push the limits of exercise and sports science, sport coaching, sport development, sports management, nutrition sciences, physical education, and more. Apply now to study at Deakin in 2024. Abhi, it's been a long time coming. Welcome to the SportsGrad podcast.
Yeah, good to see you blokes. We haven't talked in a while, so it's good to be here and have a yarn and see where we get to.
Abhi, we always love reconnecting with former colleagues from Cricket Australia. If I'm not mistaken, around 2018, you joined the Big Bash team, which was when a crucial element of the Big Bash changed, and that was how they decided who would determine who would bat and who would bowl. Am I correct in thinking you are the brains behind the bat flip that's now become infamous across the league?
I'll take credit for it, Rubes, but to be fair, it was actually Daniel Jane, who now works heading up the digital department at Tennis Australia, that came up with the idea around using hills and valleys or roofs and flats. There was a lot of conjecture around what we should call it at the time as well. But the reason I'll take credit is I took that sort of planted seed and operationalized it to make it sound a lot more important than what it is. And we thought it was just a one-off idea, just a little bit of a cool way to generate some talkability and have a laugh and sort of bring the game back to kids. But it just took on a life of its own. Like one journo wrote an article, and then there's all this controversy around, is the bat weighted perfectly and is it still 50-50 and should it be hills and valleys because it's state by state, it's different is what we learnt around Queensland, New South Wales and Vic, so we started polarising people. But if that's my only legacy in cricket, I'll stop one step short of saying I'll be proud because hopefully I've done more things in cricket, but at the same time, it's a really cool thing to be tied to, and to see it happening is just a little bit of fun. But at the same time, something simple can create a lot of interest and engagement. So it's cool.
Did you get pulled into the CEO's office the day that it landed on its side and we couldn't get a result?
No, once again, all talkability is good talkability on the bat flip. There were a couple of rogue ones that on the sides happened a surprisingly high number of times. We've had a few sort of flung at sort of packs of people around the bat flip as well. there's a few journos that have nearly copped a bat flip to the face when they're trying to take photos of what's happening as well. So as I said, it's one of those weird things that you can't imagine why we didn't do it earlier. And now it's sort of here to stay, and it just happens as well. And we actually worked pretty closely with Kookaburra at the time. They actually created the to call it prototypes seems to be a bit of a stretch, but I have 2 or 3 of the initial bat flip bats that we were going to use, and then we ended up with the ones that we have now. So it's random thing I've done in cricket, but probably one thing that I'll look back on, and every time I see it, I'll know what went into it.
One of the great legacy pieces, I think, the bat flip. And I think initially I was like, what the hell's Abby doing up there in BBL? Like, what is this bat flip? And I was quickly turned. I was thinking, if it's good enough for the backyard, it's good enough for the BBL. So brilliant move.
Thank you, mate. As I said, I'm taking all credit these days. So it's a 3D printed sticker as well to make it look like it's a proper bat. So there's a lot of science and technology and validation that went into it. Rest assured.
Yeah. Mate, we start our podcast with some quick fire questions designed so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better. So I'll fire off the first one. What was your first ever job?
It was a Coles deli assistant. So it was fresh out of high school, I think, or around early uni days. And fair to say it was a good job, but I didn't like this going home smelling like seafood on most days once you got in the car on the way back home. So did it for a few years, but paid for the nights out and the feeds at uni. So it did its job.
Speaking of uni, what did you study?
A Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Psychological Science as a dual degree. I actually thought I was going to be a psychologist when I first started that, and then realised that's not good for whoever would have been my potential patients post. So I ended up following the legal path a bit more. It wasn't. I think it was fairly common to do a double degree, so you just did it because that's what most people were doing. But it ended up being a lawyer after that.
Nice. You've been around plenty of sporting moments in your time at cricket, but is there a sporting moment of your life that stands out?
I struggle with sort of narrowing which ones you like and which ones you don't. I actually, and this is not just because I work in media rights, I reckon some of the best sporting moments are ones I've actually watched on TV. I reckon TV gives you like a really good seat in the house to like experience what's happening. And certainly these days with all the sort of drones and all the other cameras that can go into it. But in the sort of more formative times of my sports fandom, I think Amazing Adelaide, as it's now known, or the 06-07 Ashes series was just unbelievable. Love Glenn McGrath, love Shane Warne, love Ricky Ponting. Like that team was just an unbelievably good team to have in one country with all those players in it at the same time. So seeing that was pretty cool. But I was also, live when Peter Siddle took a hat trick on his birthday at the Gabba, and I won't ever forget the amount of people banging chairs in Queensland, and was there with a few mates, and I can sort of recall the moment, the sound, and the bail flying off. I think it was a bowler in the last one, or Albert, I can't remember, but it was just an unbelievable sort of moment to be a part of as well. So pick random cricket moments, mate. There's quite a few. So
that Siddle hat trick would have been incredible. We were just talking off air about one of your recent hires, Liam Peddle. On that note, is there any particular favourite interview questions that you like to ask of candidates?
Yeah, I was asked this ages ago, and it's always just stuck with me. And I've now introduced it when I interview candidates. Is I've learnt the most from the mistakes I've made, generally speaking, in a professional sense. And so I always ask them to give an example of a mistake that they've made, without necessarily dwelling on the mistake. More keen to understand how they went about addressing it and what steps they took to resolve the mistake or the issues that flowed from the mistake. And I think generally when you find people that can answer that there's a level of introspection and a level of understanding of trying to learn and curiosity. And people that sort of say they've never really made a mistake is, I find, like a bit of an orange flag. It's not an immediate red flag, but you sort of, if you're at perfection, there's something that's not quite right. So it sort of throws people off as well when you ask a question, because a lot of people prepare for positive stuff. So I think asking people to reflect on challenges or difficulties actually sort of gives you an insight as to how they think and how they want to position themselves.
Yeah, ideally you don't want someone who's never made a mistake either. It's pretty Yeah, might be a bit of a worry. What's a book or a podcast that sort of helped you at work?
I'm not one of those dive into a book and get coached and apply everything sort of people. And there's nothing wrong with if that works for you. It just doesn't work for me is what I found. I like to I'm big into autobiographies and just learning about people's stories is makes me sort of just understand different perspectives. So like podcasts that interview people or talk to people are always great, this one included. But the Andre Agassi's book is one that comes to mind. I'm not a huge reader, but open his autobiography. Just the amount of like honesty and vulnerability and sort of authenticity he had when he spoke to his career. He had an amazing career, but he speaks about worrying about his wig falling off when he's playing a semi-final in a Grand Slam, and he speaks openly about his challenges with some drug issues and how that derailed it. Like to be able to like speak to those but still be sort of genuine and sort of talk about the lessons he learned was just sort of resonated. One that I remember. Not trying to say I want to wear a wig and do my job, but it was just a cool way to tell his story.
That has been on my reading list for a long time. I do need to get around to it. Next question. What is one platform you use at work that you couldn't live without?
Because it's largely a sales gig these days in the media rights. I think Outlook is probably the answer. It sounds a bit boring to say it, but the reality is communication is one of the most important aspects of my role now. So Outlook supplemented by WhatsApp is probably the answer. But if we're talking professionally, Outlook's the sort of main and most important tool.
I thought you were going to say TED or Teams chat there, Abby. So no, that's a good one. Finally, if you had 30 minutes to pick anyone's brain, who would that be?
Yeah, once again, question I struggle with, right? Because I'd love to talk to so many people, but you sort of, I'll give you a cliched cop-out answer of like Muhammad Ali is someone that just comes to mind whenever I get asked this question. Because you had a poster of him when I was young. You sort of you hear about his name and he's one of the greatest, but also like you sort of, now that I'm a bit older, you reflect back and you go like he had challenges with race, religion, ability, and then later in life like medical issues and sort of becoming an icon and needing to. So he's lived a pretty full life in the way he went about it. So 30 minutes wouldn't be enough, but there'd be enough threads to pull on to just get some interesting answers. Put aside being one of the best boxers of all time as well, which is also no easy feat, I imagine. Love it.
He would be a good one. All right, we're going to dive into your career journey now and kind of find the ins and outs of what you do and how you got to where you are. Firstly, when people ask you what do you do in your current role at Cricket Australia, how do you explain that to people?
Yeah, the honest answer depends who's asking, but the real answer of what we do in media rights at Cricket Australia is we grow fan engagement and we generate revenue. They're the two key pillars of what we do as a function here. Most sports, and certainly in Australia, but even sort of globally, rely on media rights income as the majority of the funding for their sport. So cricket's around the 60% mark. NRL and the AFL is about the same. The Olympics is, I think, 61%. So you sort of like if you assume it's like a 2/3, 1/3 sort of split, you sort of start to realise that the importance of positioning the media rights and making sure people engage with your rights becomes paramount, because no one's going to pay if people aren't watching or people aren't engaging or people aren't playing. So it's about engagement as a broad term, and then sort of making sure you can sort of try and predict the future a little bit when you do the deals as best you can at any given point. So yeah, grow engagement and revenue is the simplest answer I can give to that, but you sort of tailor that answer based on who's asking, right?
Nice. And is that like, thinking about, if you sort of say I'm building engagement, is that like jumping on sales calls, or is that like working with internal teams, or like how does that translate into like we build fan engagement?
It's a great question. We use the concept of engagement probably more fan facing or outwardly from a media rights perspective. So it's about how do we best position this so that the most number of people can engage with the sort of ball that's being bowled or the shot that's being played in Australia. How is someone in India going to watch it? How is someone in America going to watch it? How is someone in England going to watch it? And then those are the countries where cricket's growing or is really big. And then you sort of have to have an eye on, well, how are we going to make sure people in Thailand start to watch it? How do we try and get a presence in Europe and try and get more people to understand or be connected to cricket? And it's not just about TV rights. It's about, there's audio, there's digital rights, there's archive rights, there's NFTs is something we've done as well. So the days of just being on TV being the most important thing are gone. So it's about how do you diversify your rights, and then how do you make sure you serve it up in the way that people want to consume it. And then that's easy to get the understanding, but then you've got to balance, well, what's the return that's coming back for that option? So then it's like we call it a reach and revenue balancing act. So you want to maximize reach, but you can't always do that at too much of a cost to revenue. And alternatively, the flip side's equally true. You can't sacrifice reach too much just to bank a lot of revenue, because you might cost yourself for the next time you go to do the deal. So, we'll get most right, we'll get some wrong, but that's okay, because, it's about trying and working out what the best path forward is. So, engagement in an outward sense. And then internally, it's more about making sure we allow people to still execute their functions in the least hampered way possible. So when our commercial guys are going to go and sell their sponsorships, let's make sure we don't give away a lot of those things in a media rights deal, so that we can still have a commercial program. When our event guys and girls want to go and try and activate more fan engagement activities, or do more in the venue, or do more outside of the venue, well, let's make sure the things that we've committed from a broadcast sense don't hamper that, or don't put too much of an imposition on that. But that's generally just Australia focused. When you're looking internationally, those things are slightly less relevant, because usually people are just sort of working out which channel they're putting it on, which platform they're putting it on, and trying to work out how people consume it.
Coming back to the point that you made around reach, do you have a strategy or approach to what reach you go after? Because there's 7-8 billion people in the world. You could essentially try and target any eyeballs or any ears in the entire world. How do you determine, what reach or what audiences to go out for?
Yeah, it's a challenging question and answer is probably the
reason I ask is because you mentioned Thailand, so I'm guessing you're not just looking at the major cricket markets. It sounds like you're looking at these niche markets too. So I assume there's some intricacies around that.
Yeah, 100%, and it's continually evolving is the other answer. So let's take an established market in India or England. I think reach is gauged more so by, cricket has the benefit of having a long history as well, and sort of media rights in Cricket Australia also has a relatively long history of us doing it internally. So there are some established relationships and usual ways of activating it, and they are working for cricket. It's arguably the second most popular sport in the world by weight of numbers of fans around the world. But, there is established competition, established providers in India, and established people with interests, and you're probably going to do it in the usual way, for lack of better phrasing. And we recently signed with Disney Star, and it was in the usual way in the way that the rights are executed. I think with in order to establish reach or engagement in other markets, you sort of try and align with broader priorities is probably the best way to phrase it. So, for example, the ICC has a strategic focus in the USA at the moment. So when our USA rights come up, it would sort of trying to reconcile what the ICC is doing and how they're trying to do it can then bring some reflected glory to how we do it or what we're doing. And we might sort of choose to go down that path. Or sometimes differentiating yourself and packaging it up differently can actually generate better revenue, but keep the same amount of reach or create a different type of reach when it comes to the population in America. So you sort of assess it on a case-by-case basis when you are going to be in market. And then Thailand is more around, you look at countries that just have a huge number of people and a lot of those are cricket adjacent. And Thailand cricket is doing things that are trying to promote cricket and grow cricket. So you sort of go, well, that makes sense for us to be trying to do something in that territory, because we can open up the sport to a large number of people very quickly and very easily. So I don't think I really answered your question, other than to say you sort of, before you sell in each territory or market, you sort of do an analysis of what trends are happening in that market. And then you sort of work out, well, how do you package up your rights, and then how do you take it to market at that time when you're selling?
No, I think you made it clear. It sounds like Cricket Australia's got their own strategy in terms of what they're noticing, but then you're also working with the ICC and their strategy and what they see as well. And it sounds like all the cricket bodies are kind of working together to grow cricket, which is heartening to see.
Abby, what sort of made you move into this space? Is there anything in particular that excited you? Because I know, like, hearing you talk about it kind of gets me excited about this, because it is kind of a bit of a sexy area of sport. Like, that's where all the money is and that kind of thing. So is there anything in particular that sort of really got your interest?
Yeah, there's probably two answers to that, and let's go with the personal answer and the sort of career development answer is it's I think that last phrase you used, just get closer to the money, right? So I think anytime you get in an organisation, any organisation, not just sport, if you get closer to how the money is made or where the money is made, you're generally going to be influencing and engaging with more aspects of that business. You're going to be more integral to the business. You're going to be sort of exposed to more things that show you how the business works, and you can sort of learn a lot more about that business and get access to a lot more about that business. So that's probably the personal motivation. But then I think the sort of more broad reputational and sort of as far as like in sport, why it's a good idea is I think I'm passionate about sort of the benefit sports brings to people and to society. And if I can work in something that can try and grow more people engaging with it, more people watching it, more people participating in it, and you're in the cultural conversation, people in barbecues talk about what happened in the cricket. You get to be part of something that's quite big in Australia, but also globally at any given time. So it sounds like I'm just a glory hog. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's more like you're working in something that a lot of people care about, right? So it's just really cool to be working in something a lot of people care about. So that's it. But yeah, get close to the money, I reckon. Since joining Media Rights here, and I sort of learned more about it as I was working my way through cricket, and then now I get to work with so many other aspects of cricket. I can use some of the knowledge I gained and bring some value, but at the same time, I get to learn more and digest more, which just helps me sort of better understand sport.
Would you be able to explain the workflow of Media Rights? Because it sounds like you guys are essentially working on what's like a massive, like, ongoing project. So how does your focus change over the course of a year or multiple years?
That's a great question. I think there's sort of two elements to it. There's the existing revenue streams, or the traditional revenue streams, if we can call it that, for lack of better phrasing. And then there's the innovation stream, or the sort of goal to seek incremental revenue and to grow the size of the pie would be another way to phrase it. So in the existing ones, I think I said earlier, like there's a lot of history to cricket, and there's a lot of existing sort of approaches to cricket broadcasting and cricket commercialization. And they work, right? So they're really good, robust sort of models. It's more about sort of sequencing. So you sort of don't really want too many years where all of your rights come up in the same year, because you're sort of putting all your eggs in one basket. Now that can be good, it can be bad, but you sort of want to hedge your bets a little bit. So we sort of spread our sort of cycles if we can. And it's also dictated by the international sort of touring program for men's and women's cricket. So, naturally there's a heightened interest when India and England are touring for both the men's and the women's. So, and that doesn't happen every year. So sometimes you might set your expiration cycles or your deal cycles to sort of coincide with touring teams, so that you can sort of know you have something strong to sell into the market when you're going to sell it. Or equally, you might sort of go, well, we might take a not a premium year, for if we can call it that, and we'll put that as the first year because we know people will want the sort of premium content, quote unquote, as part of the cycle. So it's not an exact science. It's a bit of art and science when it comes to time, but it's about sequencing. You don't want to be doing 7 major deals at any one year, because that's just impossible from a workload perspective. And then on the other side, you sort of, when good ideas come along, you got to make sure you can jump on them and activate them and be set up to have a bit of capacity to sort of not let an opportunity go by. So things in that space would be, NFTs was one historically. It didn't pan out the way everyone thought NFTs were going to pan out, but at the same time, we gave it a crack, we did a deal, and we banked some return and grew some engagement. And then data is another one that's clearly relevant at the moment, where it's not necessarily Media Rights will go and work out how to use the data or what to do with the data in cricket, But what we will work out is how do we best commercialize that data, and how do we best make sure we partner with the right people that can do the best things with that data and make sure it drives the right business priorities at our end. So that way people aren't inadvertently giving it away or paying too much for it at our end.
So can you take us through like real high level? So like from the very start, like you need to go and sell the rights to, you know, your Australian men's cricket team, like, and all that content. Where do you start? Like, and what is that process like? I know we could be here for 3 hours going through every single component of it, but like, you know, does that start from a phone call or like an email, or like where does that start? And then sort of what's that sequence to like getting it done?
Yeah. Hey Fox, I got some cricket on. Want to show it?
Yeah. We've got a little game at the MCG, by the way.
Yeah. I better make this sound complicated, so it looks like I'm doing my job. So little from column A, little from column B in that sort of in those scenarios there, right? Let's talk more tangibly. So I was new into the media rights role in the head of media rights role in May of last year. So I'd worked in media rights for a couple of years, came into the role. I don't have a lot of the in-person established relationships that other people might have had globally because of A, COVID, but B, just hadn't been in media rights for as long as other people had been in media rights in cricket. So our UK rights are due up after the conclusion of this upcoming season, and we obviously had an Ashes over there last year. So I go, well, we're planning for a process that we're going to run at some point during the course of this year and next year, and it's really important. I need to establish some of those relationships. So I was lucky enough to be able to go over to the UK for the Ashes, the season just gone over there, and the whole goal there was just make some connections with our existing broadcasters, establish a rapport, say good day. It's great to talk to people when you're not always selling. Sometimes it's more important just to have a bit of context, get to understand their business, they get to understand ours, and also a variety of other sort of rights at the same time, right? So we sort of spoke to our audio rights providers, we engage around data rights and other AV rights that we have. So many birds with one stone, but that trip was with one eye to the process that we're going to run. So now that you've established a little bit of a connection, you sort of engage in a dialogue through the course of last season, which we did, checked in, see how it's going, get to understand what their numbers are, get to understand how they're broadcasting it. So we sort of developed this sort of more detailed understanding of what works for them, what doesn't, what we're looking to drive, what can we do better from an Australian cricket perspective, and what can they do better for us in order to grow reach and engagement. And at the same time, there's a lot of other stuff that happens in the industry. So you got to like monitor that as well. So there's been mergers of key broadcasters over there. The EPL rights deal was done. So we then do an analysis of the value return on the EPL deal to just sort of understand what way the market's trending and sort of what works from a timing perspective. What often people forget is while we're watching at night, that might come in at 3 a.m. in a different country, and time zones matter, and going over there in winter is great, but they have a lot of football. So you sort of start to contextualize these things and position all these things with all the relevant people. So that's probably the most important part of the gig is sort of doing all that, and it's you never stop doing all that. Like that's a continual thing, and you got to be genuine and authentic. You can't do it for the sake of the process you're running. You have to actually care about it and be interested in it and do it. And then at some point, we will then run a process, right? The process it's easy in the concept of running a process. It's not an easy process, but that's the easy part, right? You sort of go, okay, now we're launching our process. Here's the docs. And then let's do the dance on negotiating the deal. But it's the credibility that you bank and the understanding that you bank and the information that you bank earlier that actually matters when it comes to administering a sales process. And then hopefully at the end, everyone's happy or everyone's equally unhappy. That's probably the best way to phrase it.
There you go. For anyone who wants to work in media rights, we can just package up that little couple of minutes and away you go. Abhi, we might change lanes slightly and go back into your career history. You weren't always working in sport. Can you walk us through the series of jobs and experiences that led you from, say, your first job out of uni to when you landed at this job at cricket?
Yeah, happily. I'll do it as quickly as I can so we don't bore people. So sort of Coles into, I will say the next job out of Coles was actually into a mobile phone sales store. It was called Phone Zone. I don't think it exists anymore. It was a Telstra retailer. It's relevant, but it'll be relevant at the end. So I'll make a point to just say, look, did that, love that. Worked with my best mate in uni at the time, and we enjoyed that job thoroughly. And at the time, my career plan was going to car sales and then home sales. Like that's what I thought career progression was at that time, because I was just living that role, right? But then you sort of realize, I better put my uni degree to use. Don't really can't justify going to uni and then not doing what I studied. And then that's it. So sort of just forced myself to become a lawyer is probably what I'd say. And it was great at the time, right? Like it was like loved it. And then I was in Queensland on the Gold Coast, and then I thought, I want to work in intellectual property law. Like I just thought you need to specialise. You need to pick somewhere that excites you and work on it. And you can't really do that in Queensland or the Gold Coast or Brisbane. It's just not big enough, not enough work in that space. So you really have to move to Sydney or Melbourne. And it was a coin flip. It was happy either way, and I happened to jag a job in Melbourne working at a law firm that had a specialist IP practice. The best way I can describe them was that they were the sort of, at the time, they were the David and Goliath IP battle. So we've sort of been on the other side of Cadbury, been on the other side of Ozpost, been on the other side of Telstra. So we worked on some really cool matters, and it was great. Loved the experience. And it was just a particularly quiet period in that team at one stage. And there was a chance to do a full-time secondment at the AFL. And being from Queensland, NRL fan, had zero real interest in AFL as a sport. But I was forcing myself to engage with it because I was in Melbourne. You're sort of like, you get the water cooler conversation, right? And I'm a Gold Coast Suns fan as well because, they were around when I was there, and which, in Melbourne is code for you don't care about footy when you say that. So people let you off the hook. So, but, it was exciting to work in something that was so relevant in Melbourne. And it was zero risk way to do it, right? A secondment full time from my lawyer role. It's like, awesome. Yeah, give me a crack. Stars align. You got to get lucky sometimes with those things. You can have the best of intent, but the luck came in where, it was the right sort of seniority level. They could charge me out at the right rate, all that jazz. And then I sort of vividly remember we were walking over with my boss at the time, and it was a lunch with the person that was running the legal services team at the time of the AFL, Simon Clark. Great fella. And on the way to the lunch, my law firm boss is telling me, he's like, all right, this is just, put your best foot forward. We're really keen to get the secondment because you want to embed yourself and make sure the AFL stays as a client. For lack of better phrasing, it was a no dickheads lunch is what I'm guessing. So they wanted to just meet with me to make sure it would fit. So turn up to lunch, you're sort of nervous at the time, you young upstart lawyer, you're like, I really want to impress, I want to get this. And then it turns out that Simon Clark, who was the legal services manager at the AFL at the time, went to the same uni I did in Queensland. And we spent like 45 minutes just talking about Griffith Uni and how good it was. And he lived 10 minutes down the road from where I lived, and reminisced. And my boss could barely get a word in sideways because Clarkie and I just hit it off, just had a great conversation. And then I think they realised one dickhead is okay, even though they had a no dickheads policy. They said 5 dickheads all right, and still gave me the secondment. So managed to get the secondment in 9 months and loved it. It was great experience, unbelievable. Worked with their sponsorship team, licensing team, integrity team. The Essendon drug saga had happened, and there was sort of washout and fallout from that with Heard's case, etc. So got to have a little bit of exposure with that, and that was like, as a moment in time and a legal person, like that was exciting. That was really cool. So yeah, that's probably how I stumbled into sport. I'm going to keep rambling if I don't cut myself off. But yeah, it was sheer luck. And there were so many people that wanted this secondment in the law firm, I remember. And there was a few people put out by the fact that the guy from Queensland got it. But you just got to give it a crack and hope for the best.
No, that's a sensational story and a pretty typical way to break in. A lot of people could just stumble in or know the right person. But what really intrigues me about your career as well is what you also did after that. Like, yes, like you may think you got lucky to get in, but once you end up at Cricket Australia, and perhaps you could speak to how you got that gig, you then basically made 3 or 4 career changes internally. Would you be able to explain how those, I guess, the next decade kind of evolved?
Decade makes me feel old, Ruben, when you phrase it that
Sorry,
way.
next 9 years.
So there was still a little bit of luck involved, or a lot of luck involved, to get the gig at cricket. So the 9 months was finishing up at the AFL, and as I said, was great experience, awesome team that I worked with there. But they had a hiring freeze at the end of it, so they actually said, "Look, we'd love to bring you on board," because I was sort of covering a maternity leave replacement at the time, and she was coming back, but they wanted to grow the team. So they're like, "We'd love to have you on board, but we have a hiring freeze at the moment. We could extend your secondment for 3 months, and then, we could reassess whether we could offer you a gig." And I'm like, part of me is like, I need to go back to the law firm if this is only another 3 months. Like, that was still the career path. You can't spend too long out of there. But in the same breath, Clarky then said, "But, I've got, I know this person at cricket, he's hiring for an integrity officer," was the role at the time. It was Ian Roy, and he said, "Look, if you like some of the Essendon saga stuff and some of the work he did with the integrity unit, they're looking to build an integrity unit over there in cricket, can put you in touch and you can have a crack at the role." And so 2 things crossed my mind. One's like, okay, well, I'm potentially going to shelve my law career. So I go, well, do I want to do that? And you look around, and there was like, I think I worked out there were 19 people above me in like tenure and hierarchy to the job. If you assume that you want to get to partner, which is, let's assume that's the default goal of people in law firm. So 19 people above me that could have done it before, or I could do it just from a timing sense. I'm like, well, that seems like low odds. And then I looked at, did a bit of research on Ian and the integrity function. I'm like, I was really excited by some of that Essendon stuff, and cricket's building it from the ground up. At that time in 2014, like, yeah, I'll have a crack. And as I said, still a lot of luck. So I get put in touch or referred, and then another person at the AFL says, I'm going to go to this Richmond Tigers breakfast, and I know Ian will be there because he's a Richmond Tigers tragic. Why don't you come along to the breakfast, and then I'll make sure I introduce you to Ian. And I'm like, this is all a whirlwind. Okay, I didn't know how sport hiring and engaging worked at the time. I'm just like, I'll just interview. It's like all good. But I'm like, no, all right, I'll turn up at the breakfast. So she, does the awkward, "Hey, Abby, here's Ian. Ian, here's Abby. All right, see you later." I'm like, "Thanks, Jude. No worries." And then, had a chat with Ian, and in hindsight, we were always going to hit it off because Ian and I get along. We're still in contact to this day. But that was the sort of, he got a little bit of exposure to me outside of an interview setting, but then, also didn't shit the bed in the interviews, which also helps. And then got the gig. So that was, it was all luck, if nothing else, to end up in cricket. But right place, right time, and you still got to put in the prep and still sort of give it a crack, which, in hindsight, I'm glad I did. And then the transitions in cricket was they were more by design. You still there is luck. Is I wouldn't use the word luck. It's probably timing is probably the thing that you can't control. So you have to be afforded the opportunity to be able to move, and the timing's got to be right, and it's got to work for both departments or both teams at that time. And I have been sort of lucky enough to get that timing right, 3 times now, from integrity into Big Bash. And the goal with that was, let's try and shed some of the legal background and add more commercial and a bit more strategy. Tick the box on both of those. And then once I got the chance to do that, the timing was right to try and have a crack at media rights, to try and bring some of that cricket knowledge and then apply it in a media rights setting where the team was trying to actively add people with more cricket knowledge and a bit more understanding of cricket. So it was actually an internal secondment that was the opportunity at the time, and then got converted to a permanent role after that. So I wanted to get there. It's not, they were less stumbled upon. You sort of work with people to try and show that you can do that role, or you can do half of that role, so that when the full role comes up, they sort of go, okay, well, he can do half. We know that. Let's let him do the other half as well. So yeah, that's probably the grand plan of how the decade went by, Ruben.
The decade. Yeah, it does sound like a long time, doesn't it? Just to cover off on the sort of the switch, what was the most challenging part of that obviously going from one environment to the next, changing industries, and even, maybe something around internal departments as well. Like what are the biggest challenges switching across into that kind of environment?
The good thing for me was that the sort of underpinning legal stuff was still relevant in the AFL. And then, I was an in-house lawyer at the AFL, so I was still just doing what I did, so it wasn't as daunting. And then even in the cricket, same thing. Like integrity officer and lawyer is still the same skill, so it was less daunting. The bigger part of that was just sort of going, do I really want to go away from private practice? And that's just a question you have to answer for yourself, right? There's no real method to the madness. You just got to work out, is this something I want to give up, or is this something I don't want to give up? And at the time, I rationalized it by, if it doesn't work out, I can go back. So you have like a 1 or 2 year window where they're rarely ever like irreversible decisions. Like you sort of go, if I'm 80% sure I'm going to enjoy it, can I walk it back if I need to? Yeah, probably. I've got like a 2 year window to do that. So then you sort of go in, and then if the 2 years have been great, you don't even, I didn't make a conscious decision after 2 years, no, I'm actively not going to private practice. It's like, this is awesome. Like I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. So that wasn't as daunting. I think the internal moves were probably the most daunting. And it's not to say people were trying to trip you up or it was about being assessed. It's probably just probably a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? You sort of, you're like, I've seen people that do this well do it. Can I do it that way? Or am I good enough to do it that way? Or do I know enough to do it that way? And then you sort of go, most people just want you to succeed, is what you learn. Most roles in most places, if you go and work with people, they actually just want you to be doing well and want you to succeed and sort of make their jobs easier a lot of the time. So there's certainly the philosophy I apply now, right? Any person I hire into my team is like, you just want them to build their own reputation and have their own sort of ability and success. So it's an unfounded fear, and it's probably just hesitation, and you can't ever get rid of imposter syndrome, but the best way to avoid it is to get in there and give it a crack. And then you sort of get one done and you go, okay, yeah, I can do it. And you get the second one done, and then you get the third one done, and you get invited to a podcast to talk about it. So, and then you see how you go.
That was the end goal in the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Do you reckon, with the imposter syndrome, I kind of look back now and I reckon, you have imposter syndrome when you get into a new job, right? New organization, you want to do well. You equally get imposter syndrome when you're in an organization and you go into a new role, or you get, a promotion, say, for you, or, a secondment or whatever. I reckon I look at it now and I reckon my imposter syndrome is worse because when I went from my job in community to partnerships, you kind of feel like there's this expectation that you'll be good and you know your shit. And you're doing that secondment, you're going to be great then, so you should know everything. Did you feel that same thing? It's it's almost like because you're so comfortable with everyone and you know everyone around, the expectation's more on yourself and you want to perform better. I don't know if that is the same as you. Same with you, Rose. I don't know if that feels the same.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree and echo all of the things you said there. I think what people forget, though, is in the sort of 3 internal transitions I've made, 3 in actual roles, but 3 different departments as well. You've formed an understanding of that role, and you can add value in that role because you know aspects about it. So it's actually, you're not coming in cold. It might feel like you're coming in cold, but when I went from integrity to Big Bash, I was working with the commercial operations manager at the time, Joel Morrison, and him and I were sort of working out, maybe player contracting better sits with integrity. And we were sort of working through that as a concept. And then he got this awesome opportunity to head off into his next gig. And he's like, why don't you have a crack at this role? Because, you know 30% of it and you want to do 30% of it. And we've spoken about it. And you can back yourself to learn and engage with the other 70%. I never thought about it that way. So and then you're like, oh yeah, that's true. I know more than anyone else that's going to come in externally to do this. And then all I have to do is back myself to learn the other half of the gig. Bit of an oversimplification, but you know what I mean? It's and also what people have to remember is you still got picked to do it. So someone internally in the partnerships team in your example has gone, oh yeah, Ryan would be a good fit and we think you can do this role. So you have still beat out the other people that could have done it or externally could have been employed or other internal candidates if they were being considered. So there is a reason you're there. You don't just get it for the sake of getting it. So you sort of, once you sort of remember those things, once you're in it, you sort of go, okay, well, that should hopefully give a bit of comfort. It's never easy when you're in the moment, but in hindsight, that was true for all the transitions I made. I knew so much about the role I was going to do. I just didn't know I knew it.
Yeah.
I want to ask about how you've changed as a person during your time at Cricket Australia, because you mentioned that those internal transfers were more by design, which I'm guessing takes a fair bit of introspection and reflection. And I was wondering if in that process of self-reflection, have you noticed anything in yourself that's changed from when you joined cricket to, say, where you are now, whether that's just overall confidence or you feel like your skill set is massively evolved, that you can go and do anything, or something else? Are there any personal things you've noticed in how you've changed in the last 9 years?
Yeah, great question. And I don't think I've thought about it that way specifically. I think that let's do, I always like to say 3 things because it makes it sound like you've considered yourself more. I think the first one is, I've learned you can't control timing. So like you just gotta give it a crack, right? Like just do your job at whatever job you're doing on the day you're doing it. Just try and give it the best possible shot you can, and position yourself to try and get all these opportunities and stuff. But it can be impossible to control timing. You can do things to try and influence that timing. You can speak to people. You can learn more about things. You can go and do courses. You can try and upskill. Like all of those things you should do. But you should always just do it with a view to, okay, when it's the time, I'll be ready, as opposed to not doing it and then regretting you weren't ready at the time you got to do it. But you can't control timing, right? So I've learned not to sweat timing. So it's like you just got to hope for the best at like when it comes to making the move. So like when I was applying for the head of media rights, so like if it's not the right time for me to get it, I won't get it. But I'll put myself in the best possible place to try and get it, is what I knew I could definitively say. And it all worked out in that scenario. But I'm sure there are other scenarios where it might not have worked out. The two other things is, like, from a career perspective, I always view it as, I've never been here's my 5-year plan, here's my 10-year plan sort of guy. It doesn't work for me. I find it sort of narrows my thinking a bit. It's not to criticize that approach. I think it works for a lot of people and that's awesome. It just doesn't work for me. So what I've rationalized it back to is, as long as I'm doing something today that I think will help me get the next thing I want to do, I'm okay with that. So every move I've made internally is like I've actually broadened my experience as a sports administrator and broadened my skill set as a sports administrator, because I'm like, well, now I can do more things in sport as an administrator based on that career journey I've had. And that's worked. And I sort of only learned that as I went like through. It wasn't what I set out to do, but on reflection, that's what I've done. And it's probably something I'll continue to do for the rest of my professional career. And it doesn't have to be in sport, right? Just if it's in sport, great. If it's not, all good. But at least I'm sort of following that trajectory. And then the final thing I've learned, which I'm blanking on at the moment because I sort of pigeonholed myself into saying 3 things. So yeah, I honestly can't remember the third thing. It'll come back to
We'll run with 2.
Yeah, we'll run with 2.
Nice, mate. I want to touch on sort of you as a leader and as a manager, and how you sort of, how you lead and how you be a great manager. So like, how do you strive to manage people, and what do you look for, in your team specifically as a leader?
It's a strange progression I've had, right? Like I've worked in a lot of places where you work in to use the sort of the wanky term, like matrix to management organizations or matrix-based approach, sort of execution in law firms, and even as like in-house lawyers, you're not really responsible for anyone or managing anyone, but you are responsible for the output that impacts on a lot of people. So the foundations of my career were client servicing and being a trusted advisor was always the goal, which actually makes you learn to adapt to a lot of styles. So you can't just have one way you do it, because it might not respond to a variety of your clients. So you sort of have to actually adapt and mirror and sort of manipulate the way you want to get an outcome. And that actually, in hindsight, was an amazing foundation when I ultimately had people in my team. I had sort of a couple in Big Bash and we've got a few in media rights now. And what I learned is you just got to set people up to succeed is what I would sort of phrase it as. You don't want to be telling people what to do all the time, because then it just means it's only your ideas that are getting executed or done. Now, you might have a level of experience and skill and you have to guide and you have to have input, but at the same time, you've got to try and set people up for success and let them carve out their own space and build their own reputations. Because if the people I worked with didn't give me that opportunity, I wouldn't be here now. So people like Simon Clark and Ian Roy were sort of instrumental in being able to let me have more connections with the business and grow my understanding, and then let me sort of make these sort of changes. So I think that's sort of, and even a boss I had in a law firm was a similar. I wouldn't have moved to Melbourne if it wasn't for the guidance and the sort of advice that he gave me at the time. So that's probably left an imprint, for lack of better phrasing. And then I think that the next part is you want a bit of diversity of skill sets. You don't want 3 or 4 of the same people doing the same thing, because then you'll do a few things really, really well, but you'll do a lot of things poorly. Whereas if you have a bit of diversity of skills and approach, you'll actually you'll do a lot of things really well and only some things very poorly. But you'll know those gaps and you can fill those gaps or focus on those gaps. So yeah, I think as when I'm building teams now, you want a bit of diversity of skill set, and that's also diversity of people. But I think skill set is more important than diversity of people. If you can have both, great. But I'd say skill set wins out. And the only reason I say that in sport is it also runs pretty lean, is what you learn once you've been in sport for a bit. Like they're not huge organizations, rightfully so, because it's about putting the money back into the sport and investing back into the sport. So it's quite flat, quite lean. So you have to make a lot with a little at times. And so I'm not crying poor. I'm just saying that's just the reality of the structures of sport. So you have to sort of be a bit more well-rounded and diversified in the way you think if you want to keep progressing. But at the same time, you've got to set up your teams to try and cover as much as you can. This question's probably better asked for people in my team. Hopefully they'll share the same view. But if they don't, they're not the ones recording a podcast. So I'll pretend it's all true.
That's it. This is your turn to speak, so you can tell whatever you want. I love your thoughts around your approach to management, and also like how people can be a great staff member within a team. It reminded me of something that Kieran McMillan, head of community customer success, I'm not sure what his current title is, but I remember when I was working with him at cricket, he used to speak a lot about being a generalist versus a specialist and what the pros and cons of each of them are. And to your point around sport being very lean, very flat structures, you do require people who've got a bit of everything, a lot of strings to your bow, which you've been very deliberate in carving out, which has put you in a great spot. And so just more as a comment than anything, I think it's been a smart move to get you to where you are now, which is very admirable.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
What final question before we talk about something exciting we've got coming up next. Advice for younger self. You've had a coveted journey that's got a lot of chops and changes, a lot of turns. What advice would you give to your younger self?
The decade ago self, if we want to be specific. Like what I would say is, I think at the time, and it's partly just the career path I had out of uni, being a lawyer, is you think that job that you have then is the job that you're going to do until you retire. You just go, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. These are all my steps to being a lawyer, and you sort of map out your 50-year journey in your professional life in your head. And lawyers are just inherently risk averse as well, right? Like, there's one thing I've had to work on a lot as I go into sales and commercials, like just be less risk averse. So it's probably like a bit of a perfect storm of scenarios. So I think, and even some of the times that I was saying around, when you make the choice, are you walking away from this or taking this? At the time, you sort of thought, oh, how am I going to be an integrity officer for the rest of my life? And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to become this, here's the path to head of integrity into maybe you go work with WADA or SIA or whatever it is, right? And you map out, like I mapped out all this extensive path in that space and then go, okay, I can justify the move because I've mapped it out. And then now I look back and I go, oh, there was no chance I was going to, be an integrity officer and be in integrity for the rest of my life. Like that was just never going to be a reality. But I only learned that in hindsight. So I think the best advice I give myself is don't assume that the role you take now is the one that you're going to end up in or be forced to do for the rest of your time. So like, if you're going to go and work in an event-based role as your entry role into sport, yeah, awesome. Have a crack. You're going to learn some stuff. You might not like events, but at least you've learned some stuff, and then you can still transition that away. You can't control the timing. You got to get a bit lucky, whatever. You can do all those things, but don't assume that you're now in events for the rest of your sport career when you do it. So, and people want you to succeed. Like I wouldn't have got these internal transitions. People didn't want me to, have a crack and take the next step. There's too many people to thank, and if I tried, I'd leave someone out in the journey I've had to get here. So you just got to, but don't assume you're pigeonholed into that. It would be my advice. Like just go in, learn, try and get exposure. Getting in is better than not getting in. Speaking to people is better than not speaking to people in sport. So that's probably the advice I'd give myself 9.5 years ago.
The decade. We'll never forget that one. It's great. Last time, mate, we are delighted to have you as our meetup guest speaker at our upcoming meetup on the 10th of May at Icon Park, which is going to be incredible. Melbourne meetups just continue to grow, and our guests continue to get better, even people who have had decades in sport. So I want to ask you before we go, who would you love to see on a meetup panel if there was someone out there?
Oh, that is a ripping question. I think player agents is probably a player agent. I reckon it's probably one of the few things in sport over my time that I've worked there. You're so intricately connected to players and the outputs, and yeah, we work with the ACA, the players union, and it's a great relationship. But you don't have as much direct dialogue with the people that are responsible for the players that are out there. So, and sport's never about going in and meeting the players. And if that's what you think sport is, you probably won't get a job in sport at times, because I think people can sniff that out. But like there are roles that are around the team and all that, and they get exposure. But then on the sort of more administrative side, you probably just don't see as much. So without sort of picking a name, I think if you get a player agent, I think they just offer a really unique perspective, because it sort of lets you know what they sweat, how they look to make money for their players, because athletes have a finite sort of span to commercialize, generally speaking. So it'd be really cool to know how they sweat it, and if you've already had one, great, but if you haven't, then that might be a good get.
I need to get on the phone to Warren Craig, maybe Steve Smith's manager, see what he's up to. I'm sure he'd be game. Mate, it has been absolutely awesome having you on. I did say at the top of the show, it's been a long time coming. You've absolutely been on our radar and target list for, I honestly think, probably 3 years now since the podcast started. So I'm dead surprised it's taken us this long. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. And me and Ruse both have really admired you over the journey, and you're one of the great blokes at cricket when we were there. So it's been great just to hear a little bit about your journey and the world of media rights. It is a beast, and we just really appreciate you sort of sharing your journey and thoughts today. And we can't wait to have you on the Melbourne Meetup panel on the 10th. So thanks again.
No, thank you both very much. I won't be able to get out of this room. The doorway is a bit too small for my head now. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you for the invite. It's great to see what you guys are building. We sort of spoke at the top of this as well. It's awesome to see what you are trying to put in place for people. I think I said if I was trying to work in sport at the time, having this sort of resource and community to sort of demystify it would have been invaluable. So congratulations on what you guys have already built. I look forward to seeing how big it gets, and I'll excuse you for reading from the script on how good a guest I am and how great it's been. But I'm sure you say that to everyone. But thank you nonetheless.
Guys, it is time now for the People's segment of the podcast. I love saying the People's segment, by the way. Ask SportsGrad, where every week we answer a question directly from our community. If you'd like to ask a question first, you can become a SportsGrad member by joining our waitlist for our latest intake on May 14. So head to our website, sportsgrad.com.au/community to join the waitlist, and you can add your question directly to our private community Discord server. Now, Rubes, this one comes from Jack, and he says, any advice on how to improve my networking skills, but specific to the sports industry? I've come from quite a corporate industry, and networking in sport feels very different.
Interesting. I haven't got this one before. I haven't
Either.
really been told that networking in sport feels different to another industry. At a fundamental level, I don't think too much changes in terms of like, how do you connect with people? How do you approach them? You know, what are the good and bad ways to hold a conversation? But I guess where sport is different is the people are different. In sport's a very purpose-driven industry. People who want to work in the sports industry have a really strong why as to why they want to be there. And that can separate a lot of people in terms of who people gel with, who they want to help, and who they let in. So I guess one thing that I would probably do to help your sports industry networking is actually get clear on why do you want to work in sport. Because then when you can arrive at networking situations, then you can start to tell stories about how sport had an impact on your life and the impact that you want to make on the industry in return. And then that opens up conversations to understand why does, the senior marketing manager at the NBL want to work in sport? And then you start to bond on this shared passion for sport and wanting to help and contribute. So, yeah, at a fundamental level, I think the basics of network are consistent across any job or any industry. But I know from having been in the industry for several years that people in sport are very connected to their why. And if you are connected to your why, then some great stories and some great conversations will evolve out of that.
Yeah, I think you've put that perfectly, mate. Like, I think a lot of the sport is purpose driven. It's not, it's not always about making profit and money. It's about like creating great experiences for people at the fundamental level. So the nature of the conversations are very different. And I think that's the case if you go to a number of different industries. The conversation is going to be different because of the nature of the work. So I like how you put that there. Like, if you're in touch with your why and what works for you and literally why you want to be in the industry, then I think the connection with people will come a lot easier. So that's an interesting one. I've never really spoken about the nature of networking in different industries. It's interesting.
I know it works slightly different across countries and across cultures. Some people like to get to the point immediately. Some people like to chat and warm up to it for 15 minutes. But across industries within specifically Australia, that's what I would probably put it down to. I'd also just add to that, people in sport are very, very kind. Everyone's had a helping hand to get to where they are because it is such an industry that relies so much on who you know. Everyone has been introduced to someone or had a help to get their foot in the door. And if you make yourself someone who people want to help, then you'll receive that in return.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, if you'd like to ask a question of us, sign up and become a SportsGrad member on May 14th. Being a member gives you access to a private online community, a special, really special network in sport, fortnightly events, career resources, exclusive job boards, and all of our meetup events for free. So get involved and join our waitlist today so you don't miss out. In the meantime, follow us on LinkedIn, send this episode to a friend if you think they might enjoy it, and give us some love with a rating if you enjoy the show. It makes a huge impact for us to keep bringing you amazing guests just like Abby, and subscribe on Apple or follow on Spotify. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hey friends, one last thing before you go. If you really want to make an impact in sport, then subscribe to the SportsGrad newsletter. Inside, we share all the latest job openings and networking events, so you're always aware of opportunities to land a job and grow your network. Plus, we share a Q&A with a professional on how they grow their career in sport. Here we talk about things like how they moved overseas or negotiated their salary or landed a new job or promotion, made a career change, and so much more. It's kind of like a little boost of inspiration in your inbox before the weekend. So if you're like us, you're career driven and you're keen to progress quickly, you're going to love the SportsGrad newsletter. To get it, head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe or follow the link in the show notes. See you next time.